Well, anyway, I'll start. I'm Erica Lastufka. I'll be talking about machine learning frameworks for image analysis. I should have probably written L-band image analysis, and then I might have gotten placed in a more appropriate session, but here I am. So I'm part of a small group at the University of Geneva that's a collaboration between the Department of Astronomy and the Department of Computer Science, led by two professors. And we're a conglomerate of people who are astronomers, computer scientists, and we also have a bunch of related specialties in between, such as signal processing. And I'm going to be presenting today the work of myself and Maria Drozdova, a PhD student. So in general, the questions that we're interested in answering with SKA image data is how can we analyze thousands of millions of images that we currently have from the precursors and that we expect even more once the SKA becomes more operational. Obviously, there's the traditional analytic methods. These need a lot of time. There's machine learning-based methods, and these need a lot of data. I'm going to introduce a few terms that I'll use throughout this talk. The first one is maybe one you've heard before. It's self-supervised learning. And this is what it enables us to do machine learning with these large volumes of data because we don't require labels in order to learn representations of the features of our images. This is especially important when we're talking about foundation models. When they're made with images, we call them vision foundation models. These are large models that are usually trained by companies that have thousands of GPUs, and they train them on billions of images in order to learn a generalized feature space. And this feature space can then be used for many different tasks downstream. So if you think about your photo gallery, this is the type of technology that's behind what's used to suggest to you facial recognition, photo album of your dog, photo album of your trip to Görlitz, and things like that. An example here is Facebook's DINO v2, a very capable self-supervised vision foundation model that can do a number of things like segmentation, classification, and such downstream. However, we don't just have photos from our photo albums that we use to train things. We have very different looking images. You can see here some images from ImageNet, which is usually used to train these vision foundation models, and various astrophysical images in the optical and the radio. And they look very different, as you can immediately tell from the histograms. And this leads to the main problem that we have known in computer science as distribution shift. And this is when the training data distribution is statistically different from the testing data distribution. So if we're trying to use a model like DINO v2, it's been trained on these images, and we're trying to apply it to something that looks like this. And there is going to be a mismatch with this. As I already mentioned, self-supervised learning is something that's really important when you're training a foundation model or any large model that you want to be capable of more than one task. This is just because we aren't really capable of labeling so many images in order to input them into the network. So when we're thinking about these models, what's actually happened is once you train the network, the latent space has kind of organized itself in hopefully a meaningful way that captures some features. Here's an example with optical galaxy zoom. And then you can use this latent space to evaluate on different tasks, such as classifying galaxy morphology, finding similar galaxies, predicting redshift, etc. Well, since I showed you this example, you know that this has already been attempted. And here's some recent works in the area moving towards larger vision models that are capable of multitasking. You'll see there's been some attempts in the optical, a couple in the radio. These have all been done so far using Galaxy Zoo datasets and with convolutional neural networks, mainly ResNet. Now, Galaxy Zoo is a great project, a citizen science project that uses volunteer labor to classify and label galaxies. And this is great. We love a Galaxy Zoo. Great for machine learning training and everything, but it does take a couple of years to curate these data sets. It makes very specific cutouts, and then it has to do a lot of quality control before it's even then passed to the citizen scientists for labeling. So one of the first questions that I was concerned with answering when I started my role at Geneva was, well, can we kind of bypass the step and train off of the data that we have from wide field surveys? So something that looks like this, rather than a nice curated Galaxy Zoo sample. Now, computer scientists will look at these images and say, okay, there's some characteristics of these that are the same, even though this is optical and this is radio. These are sparse images. There's a lot of 0 or black pixels. The object is centered in the image. And there's, even in the optical Galaxy Zoo, there's not a whole lot of distinct features inside the object itself. So this, as you can tell, is pretty different from the images of your cat and your dog and your cryptogirlets. And then again, this is also pretty different from what we have from something like the MeerKAT L-band survey. This is MGCLS. It has a lot of compact images, which are marked here with these little pink boxes. Compact sources. It has some noise. It has some more extended sources. It has a high dynamic range, and there's no object particularly centered in the field of view here. So this is again different from what we would get from Galaxy Zoo. But it turns out that we can learn features that do the downstream tasks just about as well as something that was pre-trained on radio Galaxy Zoo, and some things that can do even better. Obviously, it can count the number of sources better because there's more than one source in the image. So our work does surpass methods that were pre-trained on Galaxy Zoo and also on ImageNet. But then it does pretty well too at morphology classification, in this case the binary FR1, FR2 classification. So we're about matching the performance of something that was trained on radio Galaxy Zoo itself. Now what was actually a really interesting outcome of this study, which you can read about at this link here, is that the commercial models trained only on, well, not just ImageNet, but also undisclosed data from Facebook, is that these models do really well. So the error is super low for DINO V2 with using the Vision Transformer. It's lower even than something trained on radio Galaxy Zoo. And this is really puzzling to us because, like most people in, most authors in the literature, we kind of assume that our data is too different. We can't use transfer learning. We have to build from scratch. And so we decided to study this systematically. And this is because if you're going to use machine learning-based methods, using foundation models to perform transfer learning is way more resource efficient than training something from scratch, and you require way less data. So if we want to label something for a particular task, this is going to be much easier and faster for us. So how this basically works is you have your input data, you take the foundation model and you freeze the weights, so you don't update the gradients of this model. And you just have a small neural network that you put on top of it, and you train that particularly for your downstream tasks. So object detection or classification or whatever you have in mind. And it turns out that this works really well for optical galaxies. Here in the black dotted line, this is a fully supervised trained from scratch ResNet-50. And the F1 score, well, in this case, larger is better. It's very low compared to what you get from all the modern foundation models. So this kind of explains some of the disconnect that we saw from the literature, where a lot of authors would assume we have to train from scratch, and either that or they would test on just a pre-trained ResNet, which is this brown one. So pre-trained ResNet on ImageNet doesn't do so bad, but the modern Vision Transformer-based models such as radio, DINO V2, and SIGLIT really perform very well in the case of transfer learning for optical galaxy classification. But direct imaging is basically cheating, so let's look at radio galaxies. Here you can immediately note that the performance overall drops, so it's much harder for any network to get a good classification performance on radio Galaxy Zoo. And here, actually training from scratch a ResNet is doing pretty good. Like only the latest and greatest Vision Transformer models are going to beat that with transfer learning. So we can see here that domain shift is definitely more impactful with radio than with optical. And with object detection, we can see this as well, because in order to identify compact sources, we really have to fine-tune the network, the backbone network itself, before we get any improvement on training from scratch. So there's actually a number of things that you can do in order to mitigate the domain shift, and I outline them in detail in this paper, so please go check that out if you're interested in fast prototyping any machine learning solution for your image data. Now, finally, one last thing that we all suffer from is that we don't have a lot of labeled data. We maybe have only a few samples. And so one thing that Maria Drozdova looked at was semi-supervised fine-tuning. And this way, she was able to use a labeled image paired together with a bunch of unlabeled images to actually improve the performance of a network on galaxy classification. It was actually a really clever method that she used. So she added a reconstruction task to the network, which basically encouraged more clustering in the latent space, and then was using kind of diffusion-inspired paradigm in order to encourage the unlabeled images to align themselves with the labels. So for that, you can look at the results in her paper from MeerKAT. And this is just a demonstration of how the galaxy zoo, the optical galaxy classification went with a fully fine-tuned backbone in red and then a frozen one in green using only a few samples. So you can really get a pretty low error with just a few labeled samples if you supplement that with unlabeled data that you have available. So this is a really nice outcome that we found as well. And in conclusion, if you're going to take away a few lessons, here's a few. First of all, we don't need labeled galaxy zoos to train domain-specific foundation models. I'll add the caveat that we actually need more robust evaluation tasks before we call anything a foundation model, because binary classification as a task is pretty simple. If even ChatGPT can do it fairly well these days. If you're doing fast prototyping, fine-tuning an existing foundation model is really a good way to start. There's various ways that you can mitigate the distribution shift, and this can give you an idea, at least, of how good your performance can be before you decide if you need to build your own network from scratch. And then finally, if you don't have a lot of labeled data, but you have a bunch of data that's similar to your labeled data, you can use this to boost the performance of your model by using them together with the method that Maria outlines in her paper. I'll just leave this slide up, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Questions? Hi, thanks for that. So if I understand what you're saying about some of these models, like, so some of them are just proprietary and, so you can't retrain with that. But if we could persuade these private proprietary models to train on our data, do you think that would be significantly better, or do you think most of the gains are already, gone here?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So all the models I used in this study, the weights were open source. This was not necessarily the best performing weights, which were open sourced. And so it is trained on proprietary data, and they just publish the weights of these models. So we have an idea of kind of how the performance can be. And I think for pure vision models, DINO v2 is still probably somewhere near the top. There's a bunch of vision language models that have been trained now where you can also use the weights, some LLMs, some of the bigger VLMs, also vision language models. So you can try out the vision backbones. It is really interesting stuff.
Thank you. More questions? No?
Thank you, Erica. Really cool stuff. I just wanted to ask, so you tried this out with different foundation models, and what I was wondering is, did you look at how the performance changes as a function of the age of the foundation model, and potentially try to extrapolate if the performance would how much it would improve, let's say with a foundation model, let's say that would be trained next year, let's say?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So it's a little less the age of the foundation model that's relevant than its objective. So for example, here, masked autoencoders, while it is an older model, it has a different objective than most of the other models. So it's aiming to reconstruct an entire image. Whereas MSN is a masked Siamese network, and it's trying to reconstruct a missing patch from an image. So we found that, well, especially in this case, in entire image reconstruction is just a bomb for us. It's not a great objective because any network can just look at this image and guess, oh, if I guess a black pixel, I'm going to be right 99% of the time. So it's more the objective and the loss function that the foundation model is training for that affects how it's going to perform on our tasks.
Awesome. And like, I'll ask you later.
It's really interesting, but of course many astronomers have also three-dimensional data sets. Are there any foundation models in 3D that have been trained on 3D data that we can use?
I'm not aware off the top of my head, but that is also a very ongoing area of research for, well, Facebook in particular. I think they have a couple models. I don't know if they're public, but definitely at the recent computer science conferences I've been to, 3D image modeling has been a huge topic of interest. So something will probably come out pretty soon if nothing's been released yet.
Thanks.
And if I may ask the next speaker to come up.